A lighthouse in the fog. Welcome to night chemistry, your refuge in the quiet hours. Breathe in gently, filling your chest as though it were a calm bay receiving the tide. Hold that breath for a soft count of 4, letting the stillness settle over you, and then release it in a slow, easy stream. With each cycle, imagine a cool mist drifting away from your thoughts, clearing the horizon for tonight's voyage. Feel the hush of night gathering around you, the faint scent of pine, the distant promise of salt on the air. We begin on the rugged coast of the Pacific Northwest, where evergreen forests lean toward an endless ocean, and a single lighthouse casts its beacon through the spray. Near this steadfast tower stands a small wooden house with a kitchen lantern glowing in the window. Inside, a boy of restless curiosity balances a chipped enamel kettle over a makeshift burner. Sparks fly, vinegar hisses against baking soda, and a shy smile breaks across his face as gas bubbles race to the surface. He is Linus Pauling, only 12, yet already entranced by the hidden conversations of matter. Picture the worn boards beneath his feet, each one creaking as he reaches for another glass jar scavenged from his mother's pantry. Flour, molasses, coffee, and spices once lived in these vessels. Tonight they will hold experiments, hopes, and questions. Outside, waves crash against basalt cliffs, steady and measured as a heartbeat, but within these thin walls the pulse of discovery quickens. Linus leans close, observing the fizz and swirl, seeing far more than any neighbor might guess. Where others find household supplies, he senses keys to the universe, keys he vows to turn. Now let your breathing settle into an easy rhythm, matching the rise and fall of those distant waves. In the stillness between inhales, notice the cool night brine mingling with the warm scent of pine smoke curling from a stovepipe. Feel how contrast sharpens perception. Cold and hot, dark and light, question and answer. These opposites will braid through Linus's life, guiding him from the modest streets of Portland to lecture halls alive with chalk dust, and onward to halls where medals gleam beneath crystal chandeliers. The lantern flickers as a draft slips through the doorway, but Linus steadies the flame with a cupped hand. His notebooks, stapled sheets he bought with pennies earned delivering milk, lie open, waiting for fresh observations. He writes quickly, spelling out the simplest findings with reverence. Wait before reaction, wait after, color change noted, odor faintly sweet. Each line is a promise that nothing, however ordinary, escapes notice. Even the smallest molecule, he suspects, carries a story worth telling if only one knows how to listen. Return to your breath and sense how attention sharpens when you slow the tempo of mind. The ocean's roar eases to a hush, and every sound within the kitchen grows distinct. The soft clink of glass, the scritch-scratch of pencil, the ticking lantern wick. Memory bends, carrying you closer to that lantern's halo until you can almost feel its gentle heat on your cheek. In this shared circle of light, the boy's fascination invites your own. You too are part of the experiment, a quiet observer ready to learn what atoms whisper in the dark. Out beyond the house, clouds glide past the moon, revealing silver paths upon the water. Linus lifts his gaze, wondering if the stars obey patterns that echo those of the bubbling brew at his elbow. He will spend a lifetime proving that they do, that geometry, charge, and bond angles knit the heavens to the hemoglobin traveling your veins, to the vitamin ripening in an orange grove, to the antibody standing guard while you sleep. But for now, all of that is seed and potential, waiting in the hush between the gull's cry and the breaker's sigh. Allow that hush to lengthen. Let shoulders drop, jaw unclench, eyes soften. Imagine yourself stepping away from the noise of daylight worries, following the warm glow of the lantern deeper into calm. Linus turns down the flame, not to end his work, but to preserve it. Different temperatures yield different reactions, and patience is as vital as fire. He adds a few notes, underlines a question, draws a tiny sketch. Then he closes the notebook, sets it beside his pillow, and slips beneath a patched quilt. Even geniuses must rest, and dreams, he knows, can ferment ideas no waking mind could brew. Outside, the lighthouse beam sweeps one slow arc across the blackness, then another, steady as breathing. Each rotation reminds ships of hidden reefs, reminds families of safe passage, reminds every distant watcher that guidance is always possible in darkness. Tonight, as you drift with that sweeping light, remember that molecules themselves offer guidance, tiny beacons charting life, health, and peace. Linus Pauling will someday teach the world to see those beacons clearly. But first, he, like you, must surrender to sleep's gentle chemistry. With another unhurried inhale, draw the ocean night into your ribs. Hold its quiet strength. Release. The lantern dims to embers, the breakers soften to whisper, and the lighthouse beam glides on. Your journey with Linus has only begun, yet already molecules are stirring, rearranging themselves into patterns that heal, that illuminate, that save lives. Rest with that assurance, breathing in possibility, breathing out trust, until curiosity itself becomes the lullaby that carries you onward. Childhood experiments in Portland. The kitchen is dark save for a single kerosene lamp, its glow trembling over chipped teacups and the day's unwashed pots. A boy of slender frame eases a battered stool toward the stove, careful not to wake his younger sisters sleeping in the next room. He sets an empty spice tin on the burner, sprinkles a pinch of sugar inside, and waits. The crystals melt, then caramelize, then flare into a tiny blue flame that dances just long enough for him to whisper, "Combustion." This makeshift laboratory is also the family's only kitchen, yet tonight it feels as vast as any university hall. Shelves sag beneath jars of pickles and preserves, but the boy's eye is on the narrow tin box where he stores treasures rescued from his late father's drugstore. Corks, test tubes with clouded rims, a few grains of potassium permanganate wrapped in waxed paper. Each item holds the promise of revelation. He plucks a notebook from the countertop, its pages ruled in faint blue, edges rough where he trimmed them with kitchen shears. On the cover, in cramped pencil, he has titled the volume Chemical Investigations, Volume 1, a grand name for a fifth grader's diary. Yet within these pages he has already logged the density of vinegar, the solubility of table salt, and the curious way baking powder answers an acid with effervescence. Tonight's entry will describe the colors of burning sugar. First amber, then midnight. Outside, rain taps steadily against the window. Street lamps spill watery rings across the cobblestones, and a trolley car rattles past, trailing sparks that fade before they hit the ground. Portland at the turn of the century is equal parts frontier and ambition. Lumber mills perfume the air with sap, while new electric wires hum with possibility. The boy hears both rhythms, the ancient pulse of forest and the quick staccato of modern progress, and wonders how molecules choreograph them without ever being seen. He lowers the stovetop flame and slides a cracked beaker beneath the spout of the kettle. Steam curls upward, ghostly and inviting. Holding the beaker at eye level, he notes how droplets form, merge, and trickle back down the glass. Condensation, gas to liquid. He jots the phrase, then sketches a tiny diagram, arrows mapping the cycle. Each careful stroke is a vow. What the eye observes, the mind will honor. In the parlor hangs a photograph of his father, face earnest behind round spectacles, hands folded over a ledger. When illness took him, the boy vowed to understand the body's hidden workings so well that no child would endure such loss again. That promise glows like a second lamp inside him, bright enough to banish any ordinary fatigue. He moves next to the pantry, retrieves a shallow dish of Epsom salts, and pours them into warm water. The crystals vanish line by line, leaving the solution clear as rainwater. He tastes a drop on his fingertip. Bitter, cooling. How can something so solid slip so completely from sight? He writes a question mark beside the observation, not because he lacks answers, but because he has found the doorway to 1,000 more. Minutes slide by. The house remains hushed except for the clock in the hallway, ticking toward midnight. His mother, exhausted from running the boarding house upstairs, will soon rise to stoke the coal furnace for dawn. The boy should sleep, but curiosity insists on one last trial. From beneath the sink he lifts a jar half filled with nails soaked in vinegar. A faint hiss greets him, and the metal glints dull red where acid has nibbled away the gray. Corrosion, he thinks, a slow conversation between iron and oxygen. Someday, if he can decode that language, bridges might stand longer, ships sail farther, hearts beat healthier. He writes until the lantern sputters. Then, reluctantly, he recaps the vinegar, wipes the countertop, and tucks his notebook beneath his pillow. Closer than any toy, closer than any book of tales. Settling under a quilt stitched from threadbare shirts. He listens to the rain easing into drizzle. Molecules are at work out there too, knitting clouds, softening the soil, coaxing seedlings toward spring. He smiles into the darkness, comforted by the thought that chemistry never rests, that every drop, every breath, every flicker of flame is part of an eternal experiment. Sleep gathers at the edges of his vision. The sugar tin cools, the last curl of steam fades from the beaker, and the lamp bows to a final whisper. Yet even as eyelids drift closed, the boy's mind wanders onward, toward equations not yet written, toward structures that spiral and fold like living origami, toward medicines that will one day cradle hearts and clear airways and soothe the ache of grief. Long before dawn, the rain stops. A breeze stirs the curtain, carrying the scent of wet cedar. Beneath the quilt, a dream kindles. Translucent lattices, luminous orbits, molecules interlocking like constellations. In that silent theater, the boy strolls among them, naming each bond as though greeting an old friend. And somewhere beyond the dream, on a future evening when patients swallow life-saving tablets or when a peace treaty gathers signatures beneath fluorescent lights, the world will unknowingly trace its gratitude back to this dim kitchen, to this rain-washed night, to a child who refused to let wonder sleep. Caltech and the language of bonds. Morning light slants through tall casement windows, painting the lecture hall in stripes of gold and shadow. Linus, 21 and new to the California Institute of Technology, settles into a bench scarred by generations of slide rules. Outside, citrus trees perfume the campus, but inside the chalk dust tastes of pure potential. He flips open a fresh notebook and writes the day's heading in confident strokes. The nature of the chemical bond. Professor Roscoe Dickinson begins by sketching a cubic crystal lattice, cubes within cubes marching across the blackboard. Linus watches the orderly array, hearing not just geometry but a cadence. Atoms keeping time in 3 dimensions. Questions flicker faster than the chalk. Why these angles? Why this spacing? What silent handshake holds the structure together? He resolves to learn the secret grammar that turns individual atoms into sentences of matter. After class, he lingers at a wooden bench in the sub-basement lab, where shelves sag beneath flasks the color of topaz and sea glass. A battered spectroscope hums nearby, its prism catching stray sunbeams in prismatic flashes. Linus positions a thin crystal under the X-ray beam, adjusts the collimator, then waits as silver grains on photographic film register pulses of invisible light. Each bright spot that will bloom on the negative is a clue, an echo of electrons, a footprint of bonding. When the exposure ends, he labels the film SO2 Trial 1 and slips it into a cardboard sleeve. He cannot see the pattern yet, but anticipation thrums like a second heartbeat. Months gather into seasons, each filled with experiments that blur into habit. Pre-dawn coffee, the soft hiss of vacuum pumps, the distant clatter of Pasadena streetcars, midnight calculations inked in violet fountain pen script. Papers by Heitler and London arrive from Europe, proposing that a chemical bond is a pair of electrons jointly owned. Linus reads them under the glow of an Engelpoise lamp, feeling tectonic plates of understanding shift beneath him. If electrons can reside in overlapping clouds, Then valence is not a rigid hook but a shared probability, an elegant compromise between identity and union. He tests the idea on paper first, mapping hybrid orbitals that tilt and splay like petals of an imaginary flower. SP superscript 3 explains methane's perfect tetrahedron. SP superscript 2 spreads into a trigonal plane. SP stretches linear like a drawn bow. The models click into place with a satisfaction deeper than applause, as if nature were nodding in approval. Yet he refuses to rely on theory alone. Back in the basement lab, he measures bond lengths with ever finer precision, watching numbers align with predictions until skepticism melts into certainty. On sultry afternoons, Linus slips away to the tiled courtyard outside Gates' laboratory. There, he sketches molecules in the margin of a paperback novel, letting the names roll silently across his mind. Benzene, chlorophyll, hemoglobin. He imagines each structure as a miniature city whose streets are bonds and whose traffic is electrons. If he learns the zoning laws, perhaps he can design new neighborhoods altogether, ones that heal the sick or weave stronger fibers or mop up the fallout of war. Evenings find him hunched over a slide rule, comparing measured electron densities against calculations born of group theory. Around him, the building settles with wooden sighs, but his attention stays sharp, a lamp in fog. He copies final values into a ledger and underlines them twice, numbers that will one day adorn textbooks but for now belong only to the quiet company of midnight air. One night, walking back to his rented room, he pauses beneath an orange tree heavy with fruit. He plucks a blossom, inhales its sharp sweetness, and thinks of the double bonds in limonene, the terpene scent braided through each petal. Chemistry, he realizes, is not confined to flasks or films. It perfumes the darkness, hums in the wires, rides the breath of every passerby. A stray breeze lifts the blossom from his palm and carries it into the starlit sky, as if to prove that orbitals extend far beyond the reach of chalk and glass. Back at his desk, he drafts a letter to the Journal of the American Chemical Society, outlining a theory of resonance. Molecules that are one thing and many at once, their true form a superposition of possibilities. The wording is meticulous, yet the conclusion sings. Stability lies not in rigidity but in shared potential. He seals the envelope, unaware that the paper inside will redraw the map of structural chemistry. Exhaustion finally nudges him toward bed. He dims the lamp, leaving only moonlight to silver the pages strewn across his quilt. Diffraction photographs, orbital sketches, half-filled tables of bond energies. As he closes his eyes, hexagons and tetrahedra drift across the dark like lanterns on a river. Somewhere beyond the campus, freight trains groan along the Arroyo Seco, steel wheels sparking in the night, each spark a reminder that energy finds every pathway it can. Sleep gathers, but inquiry refuses to dim completely. In dreams, carbon atoms clasp hands in perfect tetrahedral poise, nitrogen pirouettes in a planar trio. Oxygen bends just enough to cradle two lone pairs like hidden wings. The periodic table tilts toward him, whispering promises. With the right angles, the right overlaps, you can coax matter to mend hearts, to carry oxygen, to lock radiation out of bone. He smiles in his sleep, unconsciously practicing the art he is busy defining, the art of persuading electrons to save lives. X-ray dreams and protein spirals. In a dim corridor lined with steel doors and humming transformers, Linus guides a wooden cart toward the diffraction room. On its surface rests a slender glass capillary, no wider than a knitting needle, filled with threads of dried gelatin. Though the sample looks unremarkable, he knows it contains secrets folded tighter than any origami. He positions the capillary in the path of an X-ray beam, closes the lead-lined hatch, and steps behind a thick window, fingers poised on the shutter release. A click, a flash, and invisible waves begin their trek through matter. Minutes later, he retrieves the photographic plate, still glistening with fixer. As it dries, faint white spots emerge against inky blackness, dots and arcs, silent music transcribed by electrons. Linus studies the constellation, tracing imaginary lines between reflections, searching for symmetry. He sketches triangles, measures angles, whispers numbers under his breath. Then, with a sudden intake of air, he sees it. A repeating rise of 1.5 angstroms coupled to a gentle rotation, a shape that coils like a spring pulled from a child's toy. A helix, he murmurs, astonished that geometry itself could slumber inside protein fibers. He retreats to his office, walls plastered with bond-length tables and half-finished diagrams. Pulling a sheet of graph paper closer, he plots the helical rise and turn, discovering that every 3.6 amino acids complete a full rotation. The precision delights him. The elegance humbles him. He builds a model from paperclips and pipe cleaners, letting the spiral climb across the desk in shimmering loops. Each curl seems alive, ready to flex and breathe, as though the molecule were rehearsing a quiet dance that muscles will one day perform. Colleagues drift in, drawn by whispers of breakthrough. They peer at the paperclip sculpture, then at the diffraction plate, and finally at the quick dark shine in Linus's eyes. One asks whether the pattern could be coincidence. He replies by lifting a looped finger. Life does not gamble with its architecture. The words float in the dust-speckled air, certain as sunrise. Weeks blur into notebooks filled edge to edge with pitch angles, hydrogen bond lengths, and van der Waals radii. Between calculations, he pauses to imagine hemoglobin's chains twisting into these very spirals, ferrying oxygen through a million capillaries. He envisions keratin coiling into hair, collagen weaving ligaments, every thread spun from the same celestial spindle. The helix, he senses, is not merely a structure. It is a signature written across the fabric of living matter. Late one evening, he visits the campus library, searching for confirmation in forgotten journals. Beneath a sputtering lamp, he finds an old French paper describing fibrous proteins that shrink when heated. He taps the margin with his pencil. Contraction would follow if helices unfurled under heat. Another puzzle piece clicks home. He copies the passage, tucks it into his coat, and steps outside where Pasadena's night air smells faintly of orange blossoms and rain-damp asphalt. Walking past silent fountains and shadowed cloisters, he turns the idea over like a smooth stone in his pocket. If protein chains fold by predictable rules, perhaps diseases arise when those rules falter, when a single residue misaligns the helix, or when a rogue bond snaps. Understanding shape could mean understanding illness, which in turn could mean inventing shape-correcting medicines. The thought sets his pulse drumming, but he tempers excitement with calm resolve. Discovery is a long unspooling. Haste only tangles the thread. Back in the lab, he pins a fresh sheet above his desk, a clean helix traced in blue ink, flanked by neat equations. He sits, pen hovering, then adds a single note beneath the drawing. The structure explains the function sustains the miracle. Ink dries. Dawn creeps toward the windows. He leans back, lets lids grow heavy, and dreams of an endless spiral staircase. Step after step rising into soft morning light, each tread held aloft by bonds no I can see yet every heartbeat must trust. The first molecular disease. A gray winter morning finds Linus seated in a quiet clinic laboratory, needle-thin sunlight filtering through frosted panes. On the bench before him rests a row of slender glass columns, each filled with liquid agar. At their bases sit droplets of blood drawn from service members stationed at the nearby airfield. Most samples glow bright ruby, but a few appear darker, almost mahogany, hinting at the mystery that summoned him here. He places a tiny vial of hemoglobin beneath a hand lens. Even without magnification, he senses the weight of stories folded inside these proteins. Stories of fatigue, joint pain, and shortened breaths reported by young pilots who should be soaring. Why would red blood under identical microscopes leave one man vigorous and another exhausted? The answer, he suspects, lies not in organs or tissues but in molecules themselves. He prepares a tray of cellulose acetate, damp and smelling faintly of vinegar. With a glass micropipette, he deposits a pinprick of each hemoglobin solution onto the strip, side by side like notes on a stave. When all samples are set, he nestles the strip between copper electrodes and closes the lid on a humming transformer. A soft current passes through, coaxing the proteins to migrate. Those with balanced charges drift gently toward the positive pole. Those subtly altered lag behind. Minutes stretch, then settle. Linus lifts the lid and gazes at the pattern. Most specimens form a single crimson band halfway across. Two form bands stalled near the origin, refusing the journey. The difference is scarcely a millimeter. Yet he feels the ground tilt, realizing that a life-threatening illness may depend on a single misplaced charge on a single amino acid inside a single molecule of hemoglobin. He records migration distances in his notebook, fingers steady despite the ache of revelation. To confirm, he repeats the assay under altered pH, varied voltage, shortened time. Each trial yields the same stubborn gap, a molecular fingerprint unique to the ailment physicians call sickle cell anemia. Where textbooks cite unknown toxins or poor nutrition, the evidence now points inward, to the intimate choreography of atoms within blood's own carrier. That afternoon he meets a patient in the ward, a young mechanic named Melvin whose smile falters beneath eyes clouded by pain. Linus asks permission to sketch the patient's oddly curved red cells. Melvin nods, grateful that someone finally sees his struggle as more than a statistic. Under the microscope, the cells appear twisted like crescent moons, their once pliant discs hardened into knives that shred capillaries from within. Linus imagines the misshapen hemoglobin inside, crowding and crystallizing, forcing the membrane to warp. He feels a pang that is half scientific awe, half sorrow. Back in the lab, he drafts a letter to science, choosing words with the precision of a jeweler setting stones. We propose that sickle cell anemia is a disease of the molecule, arising from an altered electric charge in hemoglobin. Before sealing the envelope, he pauses, aware that these lines breach a frontier. Medicine has long searched organs and microbes for culprits. Now it must inspect the very bonds between atoms. Days later, he carries his findings to a medical conference in Chicago. Snow whips off Lake Michigan as he steps to the podium, notes trembling only from cold. He speaks of electrophoretic patterns, of single amino acid substitutions, of the daring notion that invisible differences can stir visible tragedy. Some physicians frown, skeptical of chemistry's reach. Others lean forward, eyes bright, sensing the paradigm shift. He closes with a quiet conviction. To cure, we must first see where disease truly lives. On the train back west, he watches telegraph poles flick past like metronome ticks. In his lap lies a folder of patient letters, handwritten pleas for relief, gratitude for explanation. He reads them one by one, absorbing each name, each hope. For once, formulas and numbers yield to faces and voices. He understands that molecular medicine must carry empathy in its valence, bonding knowledge to compassion as tightly as sulfur bridges a protein's folds. Arriving at Caltech near midnight, he slips into the empty lecture hall. Chalkboards from the day's classes still bear equations, ghostly under dim lamps. He adds a single line beneath the clutter. One faulty residue, one altered charge, one compromised life. Then he draws an arrow back the other way. One precise correction, one restored bond, countless rescued breaths. He returns home before dawn, pausing at the threshold to linger in the hush. Somewhere on the far side of campus, helium leaks through vacuum seals, spectrometers hum, and blood quietly circulates through thousands of sleeping hearts. Each pulse, each whisper of plasma, carries hemoglobin wise enough to ferry oxygen yet humble enough to falter when a single charge goes astray. Linus resolves to guide future chemists through that narrow corridor between health and illness, where a few angstroms decide destiny. He folds his coat over the back of a chair, sits at his desk, and opens a fresh notebook labeled Molecular Diseases. On the first page he writes only 2 sentences. Understanding shape is understanding life. Correct the shape, and life will flourish. Ink dries as candlelight gutters. Beyond the window, the first violet blush of morning outlines the San Gabriel Mountains, promising a day when chemistry and medicine will share not just tools but purpose. And somewhere in a hospital ward, a tired mechanic breathes a little easier, comforted by the knowledge that science now speaks his blood's secret language. The bomb and conscience. A warm June twilight settles over the Pasadena campus, but Linus lingers at his desk long after the hum of students has faded. Across the room lies an envelope bearing a blue War Department crest, an invitation to join a secret government project rumored to harness unimaginable power. He has watched colleagues pack their bags for the high mesas of New Mexico, eager to help end the war by any means. Yet each time he lifts the letter, a chill ghosts along his spine, as if the paper itself carries radiation. He walks the length of his office, stopping beside a window that frames the San Gabriel Mountains in violet dusk. Far below, street lamps ignite one by one, ordinary households lighting stoves and winding clocks. He imagines a weapon bright enough to blot out all those small flames at once, leaving only silence and wind. The thought draws him back to childhood evenings in Portland, to a boy who guarded a kerosene lamp so its fragile glow could reveal the wonder of molecules. Now, as a man, he must decide whether to use that same knowledge to darken the world. He sits, fountain pen poised, and drafts a courteous refusal. The phrasing is spare: gratitude for the offer, commitment to other war research, deepest respect for colleagues who serve. Nowhere does he write the marrow-deep fear that splitting an atom too violently might split humanity from its own future. He folds the letter, signs the flap, and feels an almost physical unburdening, as though a lead weight has rolled from his chest. That autumn he turns his energy to life-saving projects: blood plasma substitutes, oxygen meters for wounded pilots, but rumors from Los Alamos drift in like static. Equations once cherished for their elegance are being bent toward explosive ends. On August 6, 1945, news of Hiroshima crackles through a lab radio. Technicians freeze, beakers suspended mid-pour. Linus's hands tighten around a glass stopcock until his knuckles blanch. The broadcast speaks of a city vanished in light brighter than 1,000 suns. He hears only the shatter of covalent bonds giving way to a cascade of neutrons. Weeks later, standing before first-year students, he introduces the concept of binding energy. His chalk traces curves on the blackboard, but his voice strains under the weight of fresh evidence. He finishes the lecture early, erases the board in silence, and dismisses the class with a soft apology none can decipher. Alone again, he presses a palm to the cool slate, wishing he could erase the mushroom cloud as easily. Years pass, yet the vision of burned cities refuses sleep. Whenever thunder cracks over the Pacific, he sees in his mind's eye a shock wave racing outward, windows liquefying, shadows etched forever on walls. He resolves that the chemist's duty is no longer discovery alone but guardianship. Quiet evenings once devoted to crystal structures now fill with letters to senators, op-eds for local newspapers, phone calls that begin, "Forgive the late hour, but time is short." In 1957, he and his wife Ava draft a petition urging a global ban on nuclear testing. They place the first signature at the top, Linus C. Pauling, Pasadena, then carry the clipboard from lab to auditorium, conference to corridor, gathering names like seeds before a coming frost. Some colleagues sign in bold strokes, others decline with embarrassed shrugs, but by winter the count has reached 11,000 and still climbs. He packs the thick sheaf in brown paper, addresses it to the Secretary General of the United Nations, and watches the postal clerk weigh humanity's plea on a brass scale meant for parcels, not destiny. The petition stirs both praise and fury. Government officials brand him naive, unpatriotic. Newspapers print cartoons of radicals in lab coats. One morning he finds a typed subpoena on his doorstep. Congress demands testimony about his anti-American activities. He slips the notice into his coat, drives to campus, and spends the next hour explaining hydrogen bond geometry to sophomore chemists, refusing to let politics sully the covenant of teaching. Only after class does he study the subpoena's ink, commit each clause to memory, and begin composing his defense. Calm, factual, unflinching. Throughout the hearings, television cameras pan across his composed face. He answers every accusation with data. Fallout patterns, childhood leukemia rates, strontium-90 in cow's milk. Where the committee seeks confession, he offers calculation. Where it demands contrition, he offers conscience. Viewers at home, lulled by the measured cadence of his voice, may not grasp every statistic, but they sense the moral clarity underlying each decimal. When the Partial Test Ban Treaty is finally signed in 1963, no fanfare reaches his now graying head. He sits beneath an oak outside Caltech, grading lab reports, when a colleague rushes up waving a newspaper. Nuclear tests halted in atmosphere. Linus breathes once, deeply, then folds the paper and slides it beneath the stack of student notebooks, content to let younger minds shine that day. Twilight gathers, cicadas croon in the hedges, and the oak's leaves quiver in a seaside breeze drifting 200 miles inland. Somewhere on a distant atoll, drums of plutonium remain unopened. Somewhere in a city he will never visit, children race home under an ordinary sunset. He lets those images mingle with the rustling leaves overhead, each flutter a reminder that peace is as molecular as war, built atom by atom, signature by signature, breath by breath. He closes his gradebook, rises, and follows a garden path toward the chemistry building. Its windows catch the last light, glowing amber like retorts over a gentle flame. Within those walls, new students scrape chalk and adjust burettes, still unaware that every quiet measurement carries the potential to unmake or remake the world. Linus pauses at the threshold, lays a hand on the cool stone, and whispers a silent covenant. May our science forever choose to bind, not break. Nobel 1954. The nature of the chemical bond. Snow drifts in languid spirals over Stockholm, softening every sound until the city feels padded in white velvet. Carriage lamps throw halos on cobblestones as Linus steps from the Grand Hotel, coat buttoned tight against a Baltic wind that smells of pine and distant seas. In the breast pocket of his tuxedo he carries a folded sheet of paper. 8 minutes of remarks polished through 100 midnight revisions. Yet his fingers rest instead on the small notebook he has kept since student days, still smudged with graphite from those first sketches of overlapping orbitals. Inside the concert hall warm chandeliers glow like giant crystalline molecules, each facet scattering light across rows of dignitaries. Violins hush, the audience rises, and Linus mounts polished oak steps to stand before King Gustav VI Adolf. A medallion of matte gold waits on a velvet pillow, one side Athena shielding the arts and sciences, the other a Latin inscription praising discoveries that benefit humankind. When the ribbon settles around his neck, he feels the metal's weight pressed gently against his sternum. 12 solid grams reminding him of 12 long years spent persuading doubters that atoms share electrons the way neighboring villages share a river. He begins to speak. His voice, steady yet unhurried, charts the journey from crystal lattices to quantum clouds, from fixed bonds to resonance hybrids humming between possibilities. He tells how carbon's 4 arms tilt into perfect tetrahedra, how benzene's ring vibrates between Kekele's alternating images, how nature prefers harmony to rigidity, music to march. Each sentence lands with quiet certainty, and in the pause that follows, Someone in the gallery exhales as though seeing rain fall for the first time. Applause rises, lasting just long enough for Linus to tuck the speech into his pocket and return to his seat beside Ava. She squeezes his hand, and in that small gesture he recalls every letter she typed, every sample she labeled, every evening she waited while he whispered to slide rules instead of dining guests. Around them laureates trade formal nods, yet she and Linus share a shorthand older than accolades, the silent thrill of turning curiosity into compass. Banquet tables soon glitter with crystal stems and polished silver. Between toasts he traces a finger over the medallion's edge, reflective enough to mirror chandeliers overhead. He imagines his Caltech students back in Pasadena, chalk dust swirling through late lectures, unaware that their homework problems now lie beneath this gilded disc. He pictures the high school chemistry teacher somewhere in Oregon who will hold tomorrow's newspaper, point to his name, and tell a room of restless teenagers that imagination, too, can crystallize. Hours later, down an echoing corridor lined with portraits of past laureates, Linus leans against a marble sill to watch snow accumulate on candlelit windowsills. He thinks of the chemical bond not as trophy or chapter title but as quiet covenant. Electrons relinquish certainty so atoms may remain together. In that surrender he finds a model for nations, families, strangers on a streetcar. Stability through sharing, strength through overlap. Pocketing the medal, he buttons his coat and steps back into the night. Snowflakes melt on warm wool, and each tiny droplet seems a reminder that even water owes its fluid grace to a bent geometry of hydrogen bonds. He walks beneath gas lamps that sputter blue, noting how resonance explains their hue, how orbital symmetry governs the flame's cool inner cones. Knowledge, he realizes, does not rest in lecture halls or banquet rooms. It travels beside him with every breath, lighting ordinary moments from within. At the quay, dark water laps against wooden pilings. He pauses, letting the hush settle. Behind him the city keeps celebrating. Clinking glasses, rustling programs, chatter in many languages. But here only the faint creak of ice reminds him of distance traveled. He looks up at a sky flickering with aurora, emerald veils shifting like spectral spectra, and smiles at the thought that solar winds and bond energies dance to the same universal equations. Turning toward the hotel, metal tapping softly against his chest, he feels no triumph, only invitation. The prize, he knows, honors a map already drawn. The real work lies in charting new provinces where molecules mend bone, smother viruses, or soothe the fevered brain. With each footstep on snowy stone, he rehearses questions waiting on his lab bench. Why do protein helices kink at proline? How might aspirin's acetyl group silence pain? Could a simple vitamin ring shield cells from oxidative siege? Snow continues to fall, erasing footprints almost as soon as they form. Yet somewhere beneath those blank pages of snow future travelers will find a faint path, a resonance of courage, linking wonder to responsibility. And if they listen closely, they may hear the quiet echo of an Oregon boy's first experiments, still fizzing in the dark, still writing the next sentence of chemistry's unfolding story. Nobel 1962. Atoms for Peace. Soft snowflakes swirl over Oslo's silent harbor as Linus steps inside the vaulted hall where the Peace Prize is bestowed. Unlike Stockholm's gilded grandeur, this room feels carved from winter itself. Pale stone, tall lancet windows, and a hush that magnifies every heartbeat. In his pocket lies no scientific diagram tonight, only a folded list of signatures gathered from 11,000 souls who believe a child's milk should never carry strontium-90. When the chairman of the Nobel Committee rises, his words echo beneath frescoes of fishermen and farmers. Humanity has crossed a threshold where the smallest particles threaten the widest landscapes, and one chemist has dared to sound the alarm. Applause rolls forward like gentle surf. Linus accepts the bronze medallion engraved with 3 resolute men forming a shield, then turns toward the audience. Diplomats in dark coats, schoolchildren clutching bouquets, survivors of war wearing hope like new scarves. He speaks without notes. The cadence is measured, each sentence a stone laid carefully across a river of doubt. He recounts fallout charts, rising leukemia in infants, the invisible drift of isotopes that respect no borders. Yet his voice never hardens into accusation. It invites, cajoles, reminds. The chemist, he says, must not merely understand matter but safeguard it, so that molecules sustain life instead of ending it. In a distant row, a teenage girl presses her palms together, eyes glistening. She was born the year Hiroshima burned. After the ceremony, he walks through frosty streets with Ava, arm in arm beneath lamplight haloed by snow. They recall nights hunched over kitchen tables, folding petitions until wrists ached, posting envelopes even when neighbors whispered communist. Now their cause bears official seal, but he feels no triumph, only renewed obligation, as if the medal is a small sun that must never set. Days later, returning to California, he lands in Los Angeles to a chorus of reporters flashing bulbs like miniature detonations. Some questions sting. Do you still consider yourself loyal? Yet he answers with statistics and calm resolve. In private, he slips away to a grade school assembly where children rehearse a winter concert. Sitting cross-legged among them, he listens to a tentative violin squeak through silent night, and thinks, this is the decibel level a world should aim for. Back on campus, he convenes a seminar, chalking new data on cesium plumes traced over the Pacific. Students fill every aisle, notebooks balanced on knees. He feels the familiar surge of teaching, electrons and empathy braided together, then pauses to hold up the peace medal. Proof, he tells them, that moral equations carry as much weight as molecular ones. A hush falls thick enough to taste. Evenings find him drafting letters to Moscow, London, Washington, proposing joint labs where scientists of rival nations might measure fallout side by side. He sketches shared protocols the way he once plotted hybrid orbitals. Angles precise, overlaps generous. Critics mutter that trust is naive. He counters that trust, like resonance, spreads stability when it is allowed to delocalize. One crisp dawn, he hikes a fire road in the San Gabriels, metal tucked in a coat pocket heavy against his ribs. The sun lifts over Chaparral, painting the valley in gold dust, and he imagines the radioactive particles still drifting high above, invisible yet potent. He bows his head, not in defeat but in vow, and whispers into the cold air. Atoms for life, not death. Then he turns downhill, boots crunching frost, ready to meet the next lecture, the next petition, the next conversation that might tilt one more mind toward stewardship. That night, as he sets the medal beside the earlier Nobel on his study shelf, bond and peace gleaming side by side, he notices how their reflected lights overlap, creating a single brighter shimmer on the wall. He smiles, realizing the image is a perfect resonance structure. Two distinct honors sharing luminosity, stabilizing each other, reminding him that every electron, every human choice, finds greatest strength in cooperation. Outside, wind rattles pepper trees, scattering seeds that will root silently in the dark, awaiting spring. Vitamin C and the orthomolecular dream. A single bare bulb hangs from the rafters of Linus's converted garage, bathing rows of labeled jars in a thin amber glow. Most contain the familiar detritus of a chemist's life: pipettes, rubber stoppers, cracked beakers. But one shelf is devoted entirely to squat glass bottles of dazzling white crystals. On each label he has written ascorbic acid in firm blue ink, as though naming a trusted ally. At a scarred workbench he spoons the powder onto a jeweler's scale, taps it level, and notes the weight alongside the date in a soft-covered log. 2 grams for breakfast, 2 for lunch, 2 before bed. A regimen as regular as his heartbeat. When a gust slips beneath the garage door, loose pages flutter. Reams of clinical studies, double-blind trials, letters from physicians both curious and dismissive. One sheet lands near his shoe, a photocopy of a common cold survey showing no statistical benefit. He stoops, smooths the crease, and writes a question mark in the margin, undaunted. Statistics, he reminds himself, measure averages. Life measures individuals. He opens the day's mail. It's stack-bound by a fraying shoelace. A postmark from Nebraska reveals a mother's careful handwriting. Since starting vitamin C, my son's asthma attacks are fewer, and he sleeps through the night. Thank you. Another envelope encloses a child's crayon drawing, a stick figure in a lab coat with a bright orange sun hovering overhead. Linus tucks both letter and drawing into a green folder labeled Case Histories. Keep. For every skeptic's rebuttal. He can conjure a page of lived relief. Afternoons bring graduate students eager to glimpse the crusade firsthand. They crowd the doorway while he dissolves ascorbic acid into beakers of distilled water, swirling until the solution clears with a citrus-sharp hiss. He explains his new term, orthomolecular, the idea that health blooms when the body's natural molecules appear in optimal concentrations. A few students nod, eyes alight. Others exchange wary glances, uncertain where supplementation ends and zealotry begins. Linus notices but presses on, mapping biochemical pathways in the air with a glass stirring rod turned pointer. Soon the American press takes interest. Under the harsh glare of newsroom fluorescence, he fields questions that pivot between genuine curiosity and barely veiled skepticism. Does he truly swallow 12 grams a day? Does he realize reputable journals call the idea quackery? Linus adjusts his bow tie and answers with the calm cadence of a lecturer. The evidence is mounting. The risk is negligible. The potential benefit could save countless hospital beds. Headlines the next morning split like a double helix. Some applauding a visionary, others condemning a renegade. Funding agencies grow cautious. One grant application returns with the word priority, low stamped in red. He sets the rejection beside a glowing testimonial from a marathon runner who credits vitamin C with shaving minutes off her time, then flips open his notebook and designs a study he can fund himself. What he lacks in institutional backing, he compensates with restless conviction and a Rolodex of allies in smaller clinics eager to collaborate. Evenings, Ava brews chamomile tea while Linus spreads charts across the dining room table. Colored pins show clusters of cold incidence rates dropping in schoolchildren who sip orange juice laced with extra ascorbate. He cannot prove causation yet, but the pattern tempers fatigue. When the clock strikes midnight, he scoops a final teaspoon of crystals into a glass, raises it to the dim chandelier, and swallows the promise of one more day's stamina. Yet doubt is a tenacious isotope. In dreams he sometimes stands before a lecture hall that stretches to the horizon, critics occupying every seat. He recites p-values and confidence intervals until his voice frays. Just as silence threatens, a cough echoes from the back row, a child's cough, tentative and raw. He wakes before he can locate the source, resolves to fight on, and scribbles a note. Design pediatric trial, winter term. Spring arrives early in Pasadena, draping orange trees with waxy blossoms. Linus steps outside the garage, breathing pollen-sweet air, vitamin C crystals dusting his cuffs like powdered sugar. He imagines molecular soldiers dispersing through his bloodstream, docking in neutrophils primed for defense. Whether or not the world believes, the biochemistry feels symphonic within him. He caps each bottle, wipes counters clean, and slides the garage door shut. Beyond the garden wall a mailbox waits, its flag upright, ready to accept tomorrow's tide of praise and protest. He knows both will come, as inevitable as oxidation, yet neither will deter him. Orthomolecular medicine is as much philosophy as protocol. Nourish the body with its own familiar molecules, and it will remember how to mend itself. Inside, he files the day's log beside notebooks that once outlined quantum hybridization and spiral proteins. Those earlier volumes earned medals. These new pages might never glint beneath chandeliers. Still, he senses the same quiet thrill he felt as a boy watching sugar burn blue in a Portland kitchen. The thrill of testing what others dismiss, of trusting that molecules, given in the right form at the right time, might yet tilt destiny toward health. He turns out the light, ascorbic crystals catching the last glimmer like scattered stars, and steps into the house, carrying the orthomolecular dream forward with every measured breath. Campfire under the Cascade sky. Twilight settles over the Cascade Range like ink spilled across serrated peaks, and a hush descends that is deeper than any campus library could ever hold. Linus, now silver-haired but sure-footed, guides 3 graduate students along a pine-needled trail toward a small clearing beside Lost Lake. Their packs clink with enamel mugs and pocket field guides, but conversation drifts in gentle threads. Questions about hydrogen bonding, about free radicals, about the stubborn beauty of unanswered problems. He answers with patience polished by decades, letting silence fill the spaces where ideas need room to unfold. They reach a ring of stones blackened by many seasons' fires. With practiced ease, Linus builds a pyramid of cedar kindling. One match later, orange tongues leap skyward, crackling like tiny applause. The students sit cross-legged on fallen logs while he brews cocoa in a dented pot, the steam spiraling into air so cold it tastes of glaciers. Overhead, first stars appear, pinpricks against a velvet dome, and he points out Orion's belt, noting the spectral lines of its component gases as casually as one might name old friends. When the mugs are warm in gloved hands, he begins a story not of accolades but of curiosity's endurance. He recalls days hunched over rickety microscopes, nights drafting petitions by lamplight, mornings when vitamin C trials seemed one setback from collapse. Each memory is offered without boast, as freely as the fire gives heat. The students lean closer, eyes catching firelight, sensing that wisdom is less a lecture than a shared ember passed hand to hand. Linus pulls from his coat pocket a smooth river stone etched with faint concentric rings. He found it earlier along the shore and kept it for this moment. Holding it up, he explains how mineral layers record ancient shifts in temperature and pressure, nature's own notebook, written in the language of chemistry. He passes the stone around the circle. When it returns, he slips it into a young researcher's palm with a wink, as if saying, "Your chapter begins now." Later, they unroll sleeping bags beneath a sky so clear the Milky Way resembles powdered glass scattered by a celestial chemist. Linus remains seated by the fading fire, shoulders draped in a wool blanket, gaze fixed on embers collapsing into iridescent ash. He thinks of molecules drifting in the students' bloodstreams, vitamins, neurotransmitters, snippets of DNA busily copying futures he will never see. The thought brings no sorrow, only a quiet thrill that discovery is a relay, not a finish line. A frost-rimmed breeze stirs the pines, releasing a hush of needles that sounds like rain in slow motion. He closes his eyes and breathes deeply, counting each inhale the way he once counted diffraction spots on darkroom plates. Somewhere behind those lids, α-helices still coil, resonant structures still trade electrons, and white crystals of ascorbate still dissolve with a brisk fizz. The machinery of life hums on, indifferent to age, eager for caretakers. Before turning in, he sketches with a charred stick on a flat slab of granite. A simple spiral, a peace symbol, and the letters HO joined by a curved arrow. It is not a lesson nor a manifesto, just a reminder that bonds, whether chemical or human, are born of sharing. He places the stone slab at the edge of the pit where tomorrow's hikers might find it, then crawls into his sleeping bag, zipper rasping like soft chalk on slate. Night deepens. The fire sighs into embers, and distant owls trade questions across the valley. Under his blanket, Linus feels the slow, deliberate thump of his heart, an organ whose rhythm he once traced through hemoglobin's iron and porphyrin rings. He smiles at the circularity. A life spent decoding the pulse of molecules now measured by the pulse they keep within him. With that thought he drifts toward sleep, trusting the student's quiet breathing nearby, trusting the stars overhead, trusting the chemistry of dawn to kindle new ideas when the first light brushes the ridge. Legacy and lullaby. The first hush of pre-dawn drapes Pasadena in pearl gray, and the city lies as still as a held breath. Inside a modest study whose walls remember half a century of chalk dust revelations, Linus wakes before the alarm. He sits at his desk not out of habit but devotion, placing one more sheet atop a leaning tower of notebooks. The page is blank except for a date, April 7th, written in the same careful hand that once traced the rise of a protein helix and the sigh of an electron cloud. He pauses, absorbing how years have softened knuckles and silvered hair, yet curiosity, ageless, tireless, still steps forward first. A finch alights on the sill, tail flicking, and for a moment Pauling watches it with the pure attention he once reserved for diffraction spots. He wonders, as he often does, how bone crystals grow so light yet so resilient, how keratin crosslinks feather barbs strong enough to meet the wind. In the bird's quick launch he recognizes the signature of calcium phosphate and disulfide bridges. No motion is exempt from chemistry's script. When the finch beats away toward lemon-colored sky, its wings write invisible equations in the air, and Linus's lips shape a silent compliment to the elegance of natural design. He returns to the page. Today's entry will not catalog milligram doses or bond angle refinements. Instead, he means to catch the afterglow of an entire career, the whirl of discoveries that, like constellations, only reveal their pattern when one steps far enough back. He begins with a memory of his mother's kitchen. The hiss of baking soda, the thrill of caramel flame, the first subconscious sense that matter is alive with possibility. From that flicker he traces forward, through Caltech basements that smelled of ozone and ambition, through midnight orbitals sketched until candles guttered, through X-ray chambers where protein ghosts revealed their spirals one dotted photograph at a time. Paragraphs lengthen, quickening with images. A railroad car rattling out of the Oregon forest while a young man reads quantum theory under kerosene light. A Stockholm dais where a bow-tied professor explains resonance to royalty. A courtroom in Washington where the same man converts fallout graphs into moral proof. Interlaced with these scenes run quiet occurrence. Ava's typewriter clacking like a steady metronome. Students' pencils racing to keep pace with impromptu derivations. Children's letters colored in crayon oranges praising Dr. Vitamin. The mosaic forms, showing how public triumph and domestic minutiae share a single lattice, each node bonded by the same element, attention. He writes until the house stirs. Somewhere down the hall, a teakettle begins to sing, and its vapor threads through the doorway. The scent of bergamot slips past old volumes of physical chemistry. He savors the aroma, thinking how flavor itself is molecular artistry, volatile compounds pirouetting into receptors that translate chemistry into comfort. The kettle's whistle swells, then subsides as Ava lifts it, and he smiles at the reliable kinetics of morning routines. A gentle knock. Ava appears with 2 cups, steam furling above her spectacles. She sets one beside him, sweeping a fingertip across the page's margin in silent inquiry. He gestures to the growing paragraphs. No need to speak. She understands, she always has. They sip together, silence deep but companionable, until a shared glance signals it is time to dress for the day's modest ceremony on campus. A new lecture hall to be named in his honor. Awards no longer dazzle him, yet buildings endure, and he hopes students entering its doors will feel echoes of the questions that kept him happily awake long after midnight curfews. The ride to Caltech is short, yet each familiar street feels touched by farewell. Citrus blossoms scatter white confetti over the windshield. The air smells of early summer even though the calendar insists it is spring. He recalls escorting visiting scientists along these same avenues, explaining how Pasadena oranges owed their sweetness to photosynthesis's carefully choreographed electron transfers. He was younger then, certain he could map all mysteries given time. Now, approaching 95, he carries a wiser certainty. The map expands faster than any cartographer can draw. And that is reason for joy, not regret. The perpetual frontier ensures every inquisitive mind a place to land. Students cluster near the new hall's steps, chatter rippling like tide pools around him. One timidly offers a worn paperback of the nature of the chemical bond for a signature. Its margins are crowded with fluorescent tabs. Linus signs, looping the L and P as slowly as if etching glass, then asks which chapter puzzled her most. Oxygen hybridization, she confesses. He replies with a spark in his eye. Perfect, puzzlement is the gateway. Then, as though time is infinite, he outlines the concept anew, using only a napkin and 3 quick diagrams. Around them, dedication speeches proceed without him, yet no one dares interrupt. The impromptu lesson is the truest ribbon-cutting. By noon the ceremony ends, photographs snapped and hands shaken. He pockets a program where his biography fits in narrow columns. Birth, education, prizes. The text feels both intimate and alien, like a crystallographic pattern he recognizes yet no longer inhabits. On the drive home he turns the leaflet over, finds its backside blank, and imagines scribbling there a postscript. Do not be dazzled by medals. Be dazzled by questions that refuse easy answers. He folds the paper once, twice, secures it in his notebook as a seed for tomorrow's lecture to whoever will listen. Afternoon sun leans low when he returns to the study. Fatigue nudges his shoulders. He concedes, settling into a well-worn wing chair whose arms remember countless pages skimmed, countless catnaps stolen between experiments. Outside, wind teases chimes into soft metallic syllables. They remind him of diffraction rings, sound made visible, another proof that resonance pervades all domains. He closes his eyes, not to sleep but to let memory arrange itself without dictation. Images coalesce, a helix rising like a spiral staircase lit from within, twin Nobel medals on a shelf, their edges overlapping into one continuous gleam, a garage lined with jars of vitamin crystals twinkling like frost, a stack of signed petitions that once fit beneath a postal scale but tipped the moral balance of a planet. He sees patients inhaling deeper because hemoglobin's quaternary twist now makes sense to surgeons. Sees children drinking milk spared of isotopes because scientists refuse to duck hearings. Sees a grandchild popping a tangy tablet, unaware of the arguments required to make that routine normal. Legacy, he realizes, is less a monument than a change of baseline, the new assumptions that future generations accept without struggle. Dusk gathers, and with it a hush so complete it might have been ordered by a conductor. The room dims until only the notebook's white rectangle glows in residual light. He opens it once more, adds a final paragraph meant less for scholars than for sleepers who may drift to these words hours from now. He writes about molecules as night workers, enzymes repairing sun-scorched DNA, hormones modulating dreams, antibodies patrolling with lanterns of recognition. He suggests that while the conscious mind recedes, cells perform their quiet symphony, each movement guided by bonds he spent a lifetime deciphering. To know this, he hopes, is to slip into rest with trust rather than fear. Pen set down, he closes the book, spine creaking like an old door. A soft knock returns. Ava again, this time offering a wool throw. She drapes it over his lap. He thanks her with a squeeze of her hand. Still writing, she asks. Always, he answers, a smile hinting at mischief. She kisses his forehead and withdraws, leaving the door ajar so lamplight spills a golden path across the carpet. Linus leans back, blanket-warming knees chilled by age, and listens to the metronome of house sounds. Refrigerator compressor humming low E, copper pipes ticking as they cool, wind coaxing the chimes into a D major chord. Within that unintentional orchestra, he traces patterns, sound waves interfering, electrons flexing, probability clouds overlapping. The unity is everywhere, infinite and intimate. He lets lids drift shut, sensing the border where wakefulness thins, and chooses not to resist. As sleep approaches, he pictures the lighthouse of his boyhood, beacon sweeping the Oregon coast. Only now its beam arcs inward, illuminating capillaries, mitochondria, double helices, each flash revealing how profoundly life relies on geometry and sharing. The beam slows, fades, but the structures it revealed continue their work, steadfast and unseen. In the final moment before dreams claim him, he feels the world shrink to the soft thud of his own heart. Iron atoms exchange oxygen with precision, macro to micro, sustaining the narrative one beat at a time. He thinks, if thoughts can be that light, that the best proof of chemistry's power is this simple continuity. A life story reduced to pulses, yet each pulse a triumph of molecular design. Gratitude blooms, fills the silence, and gently dissolves. Outside, street lamps flicker on, and Pasadena resumes its evening rhythms. Dogs bark, radios play, students argue over exam scores. None notice the quiet study where a pioneer nods into slumber. His notebook closed, yet his influence wide awake. In labs across the globe, B cells craft antibodies using principles he articulated. In clinics, oncologists tailor treatments informed by his structural models. In kitchens, parents stir vitamin powder into juice because he insisted molecules could nurture as surely as they could destroy. And so night settles, assertive yet tender. The room darkens until only the faint red eye of a radio glows, a lone electron allowed to stay excited. Linus breathes steady, chest rising, falling, every inhalation a sequel to that first laboratory hiss of baking soda fizz. The story, spanning orphan curiosity, daring theory, peaceful petition, controversial vitamin, draws to a restful cadence, not an end. For somewhere, a child cracks open a science book and sees a spiral drawn in the margin. A teenager learns that sickle cell anemia stems from one amino acid glitch. A policymaker rereads treaties limiting atmospheric tests. In those moments, the narrative begins anew, each reader shifting from audience to author in the grand collaboration of understanding. The window pane reflects dim starlight. If one could zoom close, molecules of silica would show the tight lattice he once lectured on, tetrahedra sharing oxygen peaks. That structure holds firm through storm and daybreak, a silent promise. Bonds made with care weather time. Behind the glass, a man sleeps, and across his dreamscape wander lattices and spirals, orbitals and peace rallies. A panorama of questions still luminous. They do not demand answers tonight. They merely keep company like old friends on a long train ride, content to let the miles glide under steel. Somewhere between tick and talk, consciousness yields at last. The study becomes darkness, and darkness becomes cradle. Molecules take their posts. Melatonin whispers to neurons, ATP ferries energy, DNA polymerases stroll chromosomal boulevards patching scuffs of entropy. The house exhales. Outside, pepper tree branches sway, scattering seeds whose shells encode future forests. And on a desk, beneath the gentle rise and fall of breath, lies an open notebook waiting for morning light. Its final paragraph inked but unfinished, because science, like sleep, always dreams of what comes next. And so our long walk beside Linus Pauling draws to its quiet close. We have kindled sugar flames in a Portland kitchen, watched X-rays etch spirals of protein onto silvered film, and felt the hush of moral courage as petitions fluttered across continents. We have weighed bright crystals of ascorbic acid, traced the arc of 2 Nobel medals, and rested beneath cascade starlight while embers sketched chemical symbols in the dark. Now, let the brilliance of discovery settle like snow upon a silent field. Feel your shoulders loosen, your jaw untense, the space behind your eyes grow calm. With every exhale, release the day's unfinished equations. With every inhale, Welcome a gentle certainty that life's tiniest bonds keep faithful watch. Imagine the lighthouse of Linus's childhood casting one last arc across a glass-smooth sea. Its beam sweeps over tranquil waves, over dim laboratories and sleeping lecture halls, over orchards scented with citrus where vitamin-rich fruit ripens in moonlight. Follow that slow revolving light until it softens into a warm glow behind your closed lids. Let curiosity slip into dreaming, like electrons settling into lowest energy, secure and at rest. Picture α-helices curling into pillows of cloud, petitions rustling into quiet archives, and crystal lattices folding into patterns that cradle the world as it dozes. There is nothing more to solve this evening, only the steady rhythm of breath, the soft metronome that carries you toward deep, unhurried sleep. May the legacy of shared electrons and shared compassion cradle you through the night. Good night, and may your rest be as steady and renewing as the molecules that guard each heartbeat until morning.